Coming out of the cinema from Tenet was the most bizarre movie-going experience that I've ever had, because never before have I been so satisfied by watching a film that I didn't enjoy. The reason why is Tenet was an experiment. Nolan wanted to push the boundaries and go where no filmmaker's gone before, but he didn't do that through inversion. Yes, the idea of having objects change the direction in which they experience time is a fresh idea, like it's a fresh take on the time travel trope. But that's not the question behind this film, it's just the vehicle through which it was asked. And what was the thesis Nolan was asking with this film? Can you tell a story where the protagonist is the playable character from Skyrim? He's a blank slate, has no arc, and has nothing more than the most bare bones motivation. But despite that flaw, everything else is pulled off so perfectly, the plot so fast and well paced, the action fantastic, the concept and its exploration both creative and unique. Nolan was asking, can you have everything but character and still have your story be as gripping as a story that does have character? And the answer, as it turns out, is no. Now, I had nothing but respect for Nolan before I saw Tenet, and after seeing it, even though I didn't enjoy it too much, I somehow respected him even more. Because too many storytellers get complacent. Once they reach a certain peak of success, they stop trying as hard as they used to try, and they reuse the tropes and devices that gave them that initial success. And as a result, they stagnate. An obvious example is M. Night Shyamalan. He did The Sixth Sense, people love the twist, and it was a great twist, but then he did the number one thing that is the death of an artist far more than actual death ever could be. He got complacent. He clung on to that idea for dear life, that idea of having a plot twist that reframes the whole movie in a new light, and he did it again. And again, and again, so much so it's become a running joke that Shyamalan is the guy who does plot twists. But one thing that's for sure is that Nolan is to Shyamalan what left is to right. Nolan has the best characteristic an artist can have. He is the opposite of complacent. And what is absolutely bizarre about Tenet, and what I'm about to say next, sounds so ridiculous that it feels like I'm making a parody of myself and other essayists, where we look too hard at something for too long and we'll see an intention that wasn't there. But honestly, so I swear to God that I think this is true. Nolan intentionally made aspects of this movie bad. The thing is, a lot of people have come out and criticised this film because it lacks interesting characters, and they are 100% correct. But at the same time, they're missing the point. So Philmento, a fellow essayist of mine who made a video on Tenet, and he did exactly this. And if you're watching this, Philmento, I love you, mate, you're fantastic, and you made a great video that was completely on the money and didn't skip a beat in correctly explaining the failings of this film. But at the same time, I disagree with you. At least the lens through which you criticised it, because it feels wrong to call Nolan out for having weak characters in Tenet without first addressing the caveat that Nolan shows for things to be this way. I disagree with the perspective a lot of critics are taking with this one, even though almost all of them are perfectly correct, because their perspectives neglect the difference between a creator who has a vision but fails to achieve that vision because of a fixable flaw, versus a creator who, in order to achieve their vision, needed that flaw to happen. So before you say that I'm seeing meanings that aren't there, we need to address the fact that the writing for this is on the walls, or in this case, it's in the credits, because Nolan literally called his protagonist. Not Dave or Tim, but protagonist is the character's name. Like, it's how John David Washington was credited in this movie. If that's not a written confession that Nolan chose to make his character a blank slate, I don't know what is. Like, it's like handing in an exam paper and filling in the box where the answer is supposed to go with the words, insert answer here. Like, I mean, god damn it, Nolan made Interstellar. Like, the man knows how to give a story a compelling main character with a powerful personal journey. So why didn't he do it here? In order to answer that, the obvious comparison to make is by looking at Inception. Tenet and Inception are both made by the same guy. They're both in this weird spot in the sci-fi genre where it's kind of soft science, so much so it's nearly magic pretending to be science, and both have high concepts that require a lot of exposition in order to be understood. Yet one of his stories seems to have been far better received as a story than the other. So why didn't Nolan just do the same thing twice? All he had to do was take the same tropes and devices that gave him his initial success of Inception and just, well, do it all over again. Well, if you've been paying attention, you know the answer to that question is in the question, because if he did that, it would have come far too close to retreading trodden ground. Nolan, like any good artist, is pathologically obsessed with self-improvement, with never recreating something, because that goes against the idea of them always pushing themselves further and further. Nolan did the equivalent of getting Warner Brothers to bet $200 million on him, saying "hold my beer," then shooting himself in the foot, and then doing a 5k run just to see if it was possible to finish a race with only one working foot. He may have passed out at the halfway point from blood loss, but god damn it, you've got to respect the man's commitment to the art and determination to push the boundaries. I used to love Nolan's work simply because he told great stories, but now I'm a little older, a little more experienced, and he's put out more work, so the trends are clearer to see. I now realise that the reason why he has always been my favourite storyteller, and probably always will be, is because he's a trailblazer. Because Nolan is very consciously laying a foundation for the next generation of filmmakers and storytellers to learn from his mistakes and victories. A handful of people, thankfully not many, but a handful of people are saying that Tenet has knocked Nolan down a peg, because before he was in a hot streak of near universally loved masterpiece after masterpiece, and the mixed bag of Tenet has brought him down from being a master to merely being quite good. I would like to tell those people that they could not be more wrong, because the artist that's obsessed with creating perfection is the artist that's the furthest away from attaining it. It's those who strive not to achieve the outstanding, but to make themselves into someone capable of creating something more outstanding than their prior work. Those are the kinds of artists who create the best work and are the ones who will be remembered in 300 years' time for what they have given the world. And Nolan surely will be. Ever since he's received the baton in the early 2000s, he's been running at full pelt, never slowing down, never relaxing, because he knows the day will come where his time in the spotlight will be up, and it'll be his turn to hand the baton over to the next generation of directors and writers. And it's his mission to cover as much ground as he humanly can before that moment, and unearth as much as he can about what makes a good story good, so the next generation will be all the more informed for his effort. He is not making the mistake of striving to create a string of masterpieces. He is instead striving to be a better storyteller. But it's not just that. His main goal is so much more noble. He is striving to help you create your string of masterpieces by putting out a varied array of creative experiments for you to digest, learn from, and to push the bar of what's possible in cinema to new heights. And he's doing it knowing that he may not be around in several decades' time to see the fruits of his labour in the form of the thousands of great works in which he will be a direct influence. God damn it, that is why he's my favourite director. In case the past 10 minutes of the video didn't convince you of that. Okay, now that I've got my gushing out of the way, let's assist him. As any scientist would tell you, even if an experiment fails, that does not make the experiment a failure. Sure, this film has a lot about it that's great, but enough flaws have surfaced to present a trove of interesting learning opportunities for us to study. So let's take a closer look, and yes, that pun was fully intended, at what Tenet taught us. While there were a few dozen tidbits here and there, I've boiled them down into 3 key lessons, and while all of them are pretty important, the number 1 lesson that's probably going to be the most valuable to you, I'll be saving that for the very end of the video, because I want your watch time, so I'm going to be holding it hostage. Also, before we crack on, being a YouTuber, while it is a dream job, it also means that you live in a constant state of fear. Not only can I have my videos blocked, copyright striked, or demonetized at any time, but the algorithm is often loving a creator 1 second and then they drop them on a whim the next. Imagine if your boss was Hal from 2001. He's a cold robot that rewards you if you're doing well, but the second that your numbers are down, he cuts you off and ejects you out the airlock and emotionlessly ruins your livelihood. Like, when I say it like that, it sounds a bit lighthearted, but I've seen it happen. And I've seen creators' livelihoods ruined because the algorithm deemed them unworthy. But it's not all doom and gloom, because myself and over 100 other YouTubers like HBomberGuy, Hello Future Me, Just Right, Nando V Movies, Legal Eagle, Lindsay Ellis, and like so many other names that you've certainly heard of, we've all come together and we've come up with a solution, and it's called Nebula. YouTube has a monopoly on the video sharing space. Nebula is here to change that. Basically, the premise behind Nebula is you, the viewer, sign up for a really low fee, and then you use it to watch your favourite creators in an advertisement-free experience. No annoying, unskippable ads, no annoying brand deals getting in the middle of your videos, and a major chunk of your subscription fee gets given to the creators you watch based on how long you watch them. And what really sweetens the deal here is Nebula's joined up with CuriosityStream, which is a great streaming service with thousands of high-quality documentaries, like some of which involving David Attenborough, which I really enjoyed, and they're doing a joint subscription. It means that for what's usually $19.99 a year, or if you're really quick about it, there's a 41% discount that ends 10 days after this video comes out, which is the 20th of January. So if you're really fast about it, you can instead get it for $11.97 a year if you're really quick. You can get access to CuriosityStream's vast library of fantastic documentaries, and on top of that, for no extra charge whatsoever, you get full access to Nebula, and in doing so directly support your favourite creators. Last night I watched Deep Ocean, which is a documentary narrated by David Attenborough where they're hunting for deep sea fish, and I found it really interesting. You can only watch it on CuriosityStream, and I'd highly recommend it as the first thing you check out. So if that deal sounds good to you, all you need to do to sign up is click my link in the description and get 2 for 1 on these 2 great streaming services today. Anyway, the first takeaway is a lesson that Nolan clearly knew himself when he made this film, because he did everything he could to compensate for it. This film has a pretty bland main character, and that's why the plot moves so quickly. I know those two things seem to have no connection, but let me explain why they're directly connected. Characters are to a story what gluten is to bread, or what cement is to a brick wall. The characters not only bind the whole story together as the progression of their arcs provide a sense of cohesion to the whole structure, they also help to fill the gaps, and that stops the audience from getting bored whenever the plot stops moving forward. If we say, look at Interstellar, yes, the plot has plenty of twists and turns, but there were quite a few scenes where the plot didn't progress even slightly, from the scene in the baseball stadium to Cooper's chat with his father-in-law on the porch, to him saying goodbye to his daughter, to the scene where he sees his kid's messages decades later. Like when Cooper starts crying at Murph, saying that she's now as old as he was when he left, even though this scene does nothing to progress the plot itself, nobody is yawning and looking at their watch while this plays out. Like, nobody feels like the pace of the movie's come to a standstill, even though it technically has, because the compelling character drama is picking up the slack. The thing is with Tenet, because Nolan chose a protagonist who has about as much intrigue to him as just your average rock, he knew he had to compensate for that by having the plot move at a breakneck speed, never pausing, never giving you a chance to catch your breath. The protagonist's in the concert hall extracting a guy, then he's being recruited, then he's infiltrating a skyscraper in India, and so on like this throughout the film. There is no scene where the protagonist just sits down and confesses his doubts, or has like a great revelation and learns a lesson as a person. This was all a very conscious choice by Nolan. The lesson to take away from this is if you have a portion of your story, or even a whole story, where the character isn't undergoing a gripping personal journey, such as Tenet, for whatever reason you might want to do that, your plotting needs to be nothing short of outstanding. Because there are two things that keep your audience engaged: plot and character. And if you have no character focus, then your plot needs to be consistently brilliant throughout your story, because if it's not, even if it's just for a minute, there will be nothing maintaining your audience's engagement, so they will be immediately struck by a sense that things have come to a grinding halt. A film that comes to mind when I think about this is Men in Black International, a film so thoroughly mediocre and forgettable that the only time I'd recommend it to someone is if they're struggling with insomnia, because it's a damn good cure, but if you look at that film, aside from the first 5 minutes of the movie, none of the main characters display any form of want or motivation more complex than I need to stop the bad guy. As a result, they're pretty boring protagonists, and because the plot wasn't exactly awful. It was just very average, with quite a few moments where it doesn't progress. The movie feels incredibly slow during those moments because the characters weren't compelling enough to pick up the slack. So that's lesson 1. Character and plot are the main two things that keep your audience engaged, and if you ever have a scene where one of them is absent, you need to be sure that the other one is doing a fantastic job at picking up the slack. Okay, now lesson 2, and this one comes from the very beginning of the film. If you ask me, and I imagine a few people are going to disagree with me on this, but if you ask me, the prologue for Tenet is the weakest opening of any Nolan movie. Although, let's be fair, that is an extremely high bar, and Tenet's opening is still quite good when compared to the average movie opening, but still, it's Nolan's worst opening in my opinion. And the reason why this isn't anywhere near as compelling as it otherwise could have been is because it's so alienating to watch. Let me explain. So this film begins in medias res, which means in the middle of things, and if you say in media res, fuck off, it's in medias res, that's how it's said in Latin. Why do they swear at the audience? Okay, so this film begins in medias res, which means in the middle of things. But that's not the reason why it's alienating. Rather, it's because the audience is confused while the characters are not. And that's breaking one of those universal laws in storytelling, like show don't tell. It's one of the 10 deadly sins that when you're telling a story, you should always shy away from, no matter what. But okay, to be more specific, a viewer who's watching this film for the first time, in just the first 5 minutes, is asking, why are these guys wearing badges and pretending to be police officers? To which the answer is, we don't know. Why are they trying to rescue this guy? We don't know that either. And why is this guy meeting with what looks to be a general? We don't know. The protagonist grabs an odd metal MacGuffin from the backpack. What is this? What does it do? And why does the protagonist want it? We don't have the slightest clue to any of those questions. And because the audience is asking so many questions to which the protagonist knows the answer, but we don't, it creates a divide that stops the audience from being truly immersed and absorbed with the story. But okay, let's explain how this could have been done better by comparing it to a film that confuses its audience, but does it right, and it's Jay's introduction in Men in Black. In his first scene, we see Jay running after a guy with the police behind his back as Jay screams, "Freeze! LAPD, freeze!" Well, we instantly have a foothold and understand, it is a cop chasing a crook, a very simple premise that grounds us. But that's when bizarre things start to happen. The criminal jumps off a bridge tall enough to break a man's shins, but he lands and is perfectly fine. Then he pulls out a weird gun that dissolves into gas when it breaks. Then the criminal leaps an impossible height and scrambles up the side of a building, and then later he blinks sideways. All of this is confusing, equally as confusing as the beginning of Tenet is, but the reason why Men in Black's opening is, in my opinion, a far more engaging sequence than Tenet's is because the protagonist is just as confused as we are. The criminal does these insane feats, and Jay just looks on in befuddlement. And not only does that make him instantly relatable, it makes our confusion feel justified, and that does a stellar job at immersing us in the story. If you look at Nolan's movies, so far none of them, aside from Tenet, have fallen for this issue. The beginning of The Dark Knight kicks off in medias res, but we can easily understand what's happening. These people are robbing a bank. We grasp that really quite quickly. And when they're in the car talking about their plan, how many people are involved, and how they're going to split the money, it all fills in the gaps and catches us up to speed. Or if you look at a film like Inception, which deals with a far harder to grasp concept, a film where the beginning could have very easily been Cobb running around doing things that we don't understand. Does the film start off doing that? No. It starts off with Cobb explaining how dreams work in this story, that it's possible for people to enter someone's dreams to steal information, and that Cobb is the most skilled person at this in the world. And then a minute later, when we get a shot of them all sleeping connected by a machine, the audience is immediately on the same page as the protagonist. They quickly understand that this is a heist, and that Cobb is trying to extract information from Saito's mind as he sleeps. Honestly, for a film that deals with such a unique concept, the beginning of Inception does a masterful job at catching the viewer up to speed so quickly in such a short time frame. When you compare Men in Black or Inception to Tenet, Nolan didn't take either of these approaches. He didn't give us a character who we can be confused with, and he didn't take the time to catch the viewer up to speed with the protagonist. Watching the opening of Tenet for the first time feels like when everyone in the room is laughing except for you because you don't get the joke. And while it is not a terrible viewing experience, it's not a very immersive one. and immersing your audience in your story is always what you want to try and achieve. Okay, so let me be all closer looky and stuff. Let's rewrite this beginning just a little bit to try and fix this issue. Okay, so in this rewritten beginning, let's say that the protagonist starts off as a regular SWAT officer here to save these hostages. And that's it. We show these armed criminals taking control of the opera house, then we have a shot of the protagonist arriving in a big van labelled SWAT, followed by shots of his squad leader with a marker pen and a whiteboard very briefly explaining their plan to save the hostages. There we go, the audience is now on the same page as the protagonist, but that's when confusing stuff starts to happen. As it all kicks off, we see other SWAT officers going against the plan they've laid out, like their squad leader shouts, "Hey, come back, where the hell are you four going?" as these four mysterious figures run off on their own. And as the protagonist watches, he sees the last man's shoulder clip a doorway and his emblem falls off his shoulder. So the protagonist is like, screw this, my curiosity is just too strong to resist. So he breaks off from his unit, picks up the shoulder patch and holds it against the one he has. And he sees that while his is stitched on and has like a bright yellow text, the one that fell off was being held by glue. And all of the stitch work is ever so slightly wrong. At a distance, it's good enough to look real, but up close, it's an obvious fake. So he gets even more curious and stalks these mysterious figures as they do exactly what the protagonist did in the original film, like they run into that VIP booth and have these confusing conversations with all of these code words, all the while the protagonist is eavesdropping through the door and being confused with us. But then he bursts in and holds them up, accusing them of impersonating policemen. Then there's a firefight and the protagonist ends up stealing their bag. Then he opens it and sees this confusing metal object inside. Like, what the hell is this? He mutters. And so on like that as the inversion happens and things get progressively weirder. And, you know, from here on, he then gets recruited by this mysterious agency and the film plays out pretty much in the exact same way. I realise that rewrite goes against Nolan's vision because it actually gives us a protagonist who has, you know, some personality. I know it's terrible, how dare I, but I believe that opening would have been far stronger because it immerses us rather than alienates us. By making the audience's confusion feel justified, it takes what was confusion and makes it feel more like a mystery slowly being unravelled. If there's a lesson to take away from Nolan's recent experiment, is that you should only ever confuse your audience if they have a character to be confused with, preferably the main character. And now the big one. This third and final lesson is the main takeaway you should have from Tenet. So I know this may sound like a total segue, but bear with me, this will be directly relevant in a second. I was watching The Judge the other day, which is a fantastic film with Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Duvall, and I highly recommend it. The premise of the film is that the local judge of a town is on trial for murdering an ex-convict, and his estranged son is the lawyer defending him. Now, throughout the movie, there are a ton of turning points and developments that keep things interesting. But here's the thing, that the whole trial, while being fun to watch, while being the reason why the viewer is watching, is not the reason they're caring. What the audience cares about is not the trial, but the relationship between this man and his son, as they start off bitterly hating each other, but grow to love each other as the film plays out. The plot of the movie is nothing more than a device. It's a vehicle, and its main purpose is to enable the exploration of the real core of the story, that being this paternal relationship. If we take that basic premise where the lawyer defending the judge is not his estranged son, and is instead just some random lawyer, the film entirely falls apart. It becomes a shadow of its former self and is significantly harder to care about, even though the events and the plot is identical. That is Tenet. With The Judge, it was the plot that kept my attention, but it was the father-son relationship being scrutinised and explored that kept me caring. With Tenet, it had my attention from the opening shot to the very end credits. Like, at no point did I yawn or look at my watch, but also at no point did I care about the hero stopping the villain, because the villain is a generic two-dimensional psychopath, and the hero is a generic two-dimensional protagonist. At no point did I want the protagonist to win in the end, because what reason did I have to? If evil Gilderoy Lockhart succeeded in blowing up the world and everyone died, I would have reacted with nothing more than a shrug and a huff, because the film skimped out on the number one reason why people become invested in any narrative. characters. Now, this is not the case for every last person in the world. Like some people love a good sci-fi that barely has a plot and has no character whatsoever, and it's nothing more than the exploration of a concept, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying that kind of story. But what this is to say is that the main reason why most of us love stories is because we love seeing our own humanity seen through a new perspective. If you want to see nothing more than events transpire, you'd just read a history textbook written by an unbiased third party decades after the event. But if you want to see the human element, you want to feel emotion and cry at the sad bits and laugh at the funny ones, you read a memoir written by the person who was there when it happened. At a fundamental level, what most of us crave when we go to the cinema or play a story-driven game or read a good book is not a plot that is merely eye candy to keep us from looking away, rather a plot that, while sure it does act as eye candy that keeps us from looking away, it also more crucially allows the story to explore both its characters and its emotional core. Whether that core is about a father loving his daughter, or what it's like to lose a loved one, or to be a pregnant teenager, or to have honour in a world where having honour is punished more often than it's rewarded. The danger with what Tenet did, with having a blank slate of a protagonist, is it comes dangerously close to being not a memoir filled with captivating humanity, but rather an unbiased textbook written by an uncaring, dispassionate historian. And why would you tell a story that just recounts the events, when you can instead tell a story that still recounts the events, but also at the same time has captivating characters? That is not to say that Tenet is without merit. It is not to say that somehow you are not allowed to enjoy a story because it skimps out on the character department. But what it is to say is that if you deny your audience engrossing characters who undergo fascinating personal journeys, you are depriving your story of not all of the reason, but the biggest reason why most people love stories in the first place. Anyway, that's all I've got to say today, but if you haven't done it yet, please do click that like button and also hit the subscribe thing, and also please consider supporting me on Patreon if you found this video interesting and want to help me create more videos like this. There is a link in the description down below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.